Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming this evening to the first meeting of the Ad Hoc Committee on Cannabis in Turlock. I will call this meeting to order, and if you'll please join me in our flag salute. Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you. Can I get a roll call and declaration of conflicts, please?
Committee Member Davis.
Here and none.
Committee Member Reed.
Here and none.
Committee Member Bixel.
Here and none.
Committee Chair Abram.
Here and none. Again, thank you, members of the public, for coming and making time out of your days to be here with us. Thank you, committee members and city staff, also for being with us this evening. Tonight, we're going to be starting with a presentation from HDL, and I will let them introduce themselves. But just to give a little preface for what to expect tonight, this ad hoc committee was formed back earlier in the year, and it has been my intention that the work of this committee is really to kind of comprehensively evaluate cannabis in Turlock, and then kind of investigate what are best practices in the industry that we can, potentially bring to Turlock as the ad hoc committee will be making policy recommendations to the city council. So there will be no voting tonight or any decisions per se being made, but it'll be discussion and dialogue between committee members and the public on some broad policy topics this evening. So we're going to keep it kind of high level. But with that, I will turn it over to our presenters. Mr. Ajay Kaluri from HDL, and he's joined with Mark Lovelace. So thank you.
Great. So thank you, and thanks for having me. Just to confirm, Katie, can you hear me in the room?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So again, my name is Ajay Kaluri, and I work for HDL Companies. I've worked with HDL now for a little over 2 years, and I recently stepped into our Director of Cannabis Services role. Prior to joining HDL, I worked for the City of Long Beach, where I led what's called the Office of Cannabis Oversight, which is responsible for licensing and regulating cannabis businesses in the city. By the time I left the city, we had licensed over 100 cannabis businesses of all types. Very briefly, a little background about my organization. HDL is a municipal finance consulting firm that is dedicated to serving local government agencies. One of our practice areas includes cannabis consulting, where we help cities develop best practices for regulating the industry. We try our best to stay impartial in this space and meet cities wherever they fall on the policy spectrum. In some cases, that means helping cities to maintain a ban on commercial cannabis activity. In other cases, it means helping cities to expand legal access to cannabis. It all depends on the needs and preferences of the specific community. So the goal of this presentation is to engage the community and the ad hoc committee in a cannabis policy discussion. This presentation is a continuation of the City Council study session that was led by the City Attorney on January 24th of this year. The prior study session went into significant detail on the history of the Turlock Cannabis Program and local regulatory requirements. This presentation will cover some of that same material, but at a much higher level. The main purpose of the presentation today is to seek initial policy direction from the ad hoc committee on next steps for the pilot program. I plan to facilitate that policy discussion by posing a number of key policy questions before turning it over to the committee to then drive the discussion. Before discussing the Turlock program, though, it's helpful to have a refresher on the cannabis business types allowed by the state. The cannabis supply chain is very segmented, and each component can have a different impact on the community. This chart shows the license types that exist within the cannabis supply chain. It starts with cultivators who grow the plant, manufacturers who convert the plant to other types of consumable goods, testing labs who verify the quality of the product, distributors who move the product from business to business, and then finally retailers who sell cannabis goods to consumers. I do want to emphasize that all of the business types that you see on the left side of the slide, they're also known as wholesalers, and that includes cultivators, manufacturers, and distributors. Those businesses now operate in an oversaturated market. And what I mean by that is that there are far more wholesalers in California today than there are licensed retailers to sell product. And as a result, we have started to see limited interest in wholesale businesses seeking to locate in new jurisdictions. In addition, on this slide, there are other ancillary cannabis business types that we haven't shown here. That includes consumption lounges, which are ancillary uses to retail. It's a space where people are able to consume cannabis on site. There are now temporary special events, which are their own license type. They are up to 4-day events at designated facilities where individuals are allowed to purchase and consume cannabis at that special event. And then finally, the state also allows for what are called micro businesses. And micro businesses allow for multiple of these activities to all operate under a single premise. So for example, you could have a combined cultivator, manufacturer, distributor, all operating at one site. So I also want to take a quick step back and look at the state and regional environment for cannabis before we get into Turlock specifically. This slide shows the number of licensed cannabis businesses statewide. As you can see, there are over 11,000 cannabis businesses in California, but only a fraction of those businesses are retailers. The vast majority of licensed cannabis businesses operate at wholesale currently in the state. So as a result, there is a lot of cannabis product being produced in the state, but very few locations where it can be legally sold. And one of the side effects of this is that many consumers still purchase cannabis through illicit channels, despite the existence of licensed businesses in California. This chart furthers that point. What you see on this slide is what HDL estimates to be the gap that exists between the number of licensed cannabis retail storefronts and the number that's needed to supply local demand. Counties that you see here with a darker shade of blue have a larger gap between legal supply and local demand. But as you can see, the county of Stanislaus has an estimated shortage of only 9 licensed cannabis retailers, which means that the county is fairly well served by licensed cannabis businesses. However, there is some capacity to license additional retailers if Turlock or other jurisdictions in the region choose to go that route. This slide shows the licensed businesses that are currently operating in the city. They're shown in red dots. We also have, as yellow dots, pending businesses. There's one pending retailer at the southern end of the city and one pending wholesaler. Both businesses are still moving through the application and licensing process. This slide shows where cannabis businesses are located within the region. So once more, we include Turlock in the middle with both the licensed and pending businesses. And then there are a number of various types of cannabis businesses spread throughout the region. I may have skipped one. I did. So this slide identifies in more detail some of the surrounding jurisdictions that permit cannabis activity. Like Turlock, most of these cities permit retail, cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, and testing businesses. Stanislaus County also permits micro businesses, which, as I explained earlier, allows for multiple business types to all operate on a single premise. This slide shows the number of licensed businesses by type within each jurisdiction. As you can see, the city of Modesto has the greatest number of businesses at 35, with Atwater and Riverbank with the next highest number at 10. All of the remaining jurisdictions have fewer than 10 businesses. Here we show Turlock with just 3 businesses due to the fact that we have excluded the pending businesses within the city. So next, I'm going to quickly discuss the Turlock Cannabis Pilot Program specifically. Again, much of this information was already covered in the prior study session, so I will not spend too much time on some of the same topics. This slide shows the recent legislative history of cannabis at both the state and local level. As you're aware, the state took a number of legislative actions in 2016 and 2017, which resulted in the legalization of medical and adult use cannabis in California. In May of 2019, the city adopted its cannabis business pilot program. And in June of 2019, the city conducted an RFQ for cannabis permits and began approving applicants to operate in the city. This slide summarizes the pilot program itself, which allows for retail, cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, and testing facilities to operate in the city. The program allows for a maximum of 4 retailers with no limit on the number of other business types. Per the municipal code, all the businesses are required to enter into a development agreement with the city prior to operating. Each development agreement has a 5-year term and includes a public benefit fee, which I'll discuss in the next slide. In addition to the development agreement, all businesses are required to obtain a conditional use permit for whatever property they are seeking to locate in. This slide summarizes the public benefit fee structure. The structure includes a 5.25% gross receipts fee, or a flat fee of $25,000, whichever is greater for retailers. The flat fee does increase to $45,000 after 4 years of operation. I do want to point out that once you get to a $45,000 monthly rate, that means that unless a business is generating $10 million per year in gross receipts, they by definition will then default to the flat rate. Flat fees are by definition regressive, meaning that they place a greater burden on businesses the lower their annual revenues are. This slide also shows revenues received to date through the public benefit fee, which staff identified as roughly $3.6 million since the inception of the program. This table, and it's slightly different than what I believe was printed for the room, so I apologize for the discrepancies. We've corrected it and put it now on this slide that you see here. But this table shows the cannabis tax rates for all of the cities in unincorporated communities in Stanislaus and Merced counties. 3 of the cities shown here, Oakdale, Patterson, and Riverbank, are shown as maximum rates because we weren't able to identify the specific rates that they currently charge. So keep that in mind when you look at those 3 jurisdictions. Of the jurisdictions shown here, 4 of them use development agreements with community benefit fees as a means for generating revenues. In our experience throughout California, the use of development agreements is less common statewide than what you see here. Here, 4 out of this list is more than what we typically would have expected to see. This slide shows cannabis zoning requirements. Generally speaking, retail businesses are permitted in commercial districts, while non-retail businesses are permitted in more industrial areas of the city. In all cases, wherever they're authorized to locate, cannabis businesses are required to obtain a conditional use permit. There are also special requirements in the downtown and west side industrial overlays, which I'm not going to go into detail, but is important to clarify. In addition to these zoning requirements, there are what are called sensitive use buffer requirements, which mandate that cannabis businesses have to locate a minimum of 600 feet from sensitive uses, which are defined as schools, commercial daycare centers, and youth centers. The pilot program adopted by the city also included a number of regulatory requirements for businesses, some of which you can see on this slide. Additionally, as with any other cannabis business in California, local operators are required to follow state regulations, which are adopted by the Department of Cannabis Control, also known as the DCC. State regulations cover additional topics such as advertising, inventory control, packaging and labeling, product testing, and other regulatory requirements. However, there are a number of best practice regulatory requirements that, from what we can tell, were omitted from the original pilot program. Common best practices that you see in other local jurisdictions that were omitted from the Turlock ordinance include language related to criminal background checks, transfers of ownership, changes of location, how to handle those types of requests, if at all, and other standard regulatory requirements. In theory, many of these best practice requirements could be addressed through amendments to the cannabis ordinance. So that brings us to the policy discussion. I do want to emphasize that the policy questions identified here are only intended to cover initial key policy questions. The goal is not to cover every topic related to cannabis in Turlock today. There will be future discussions on cannabis policy in the city where more detail will be fleshed out. However, to the extent that these questions can be answered first, that will help focus future discussions that go into greater detail on specific areas. So the first question, I believe, is one of the more obvious ones, and that is, should the cannabis pilot program be made permanent? And here there are three fundamental options. The first is to allow the program to sunset. The way of doing that would, in theory, be simply allowing the existing development agreements to expire. That does mean that each development agreement would expire at a different time because they were all entered into at different times. The second option is to extend the program. So don't make a decision at this time as to whether or not to make it permanent, but allow it to continue. The way to do that would be to renew existing development agreements as they expire and continue them and delay making the decision on the permanence of the program until the future. And the third option, of course, is to make the program permanent. There are two main ways of doing that. The first would be to take the existing ordinances and simply amend them, make tweaks to them, make improvements. It builds upon the existing framework, but does so in a way that clearly makes the program exist for the long run. The second option, and it depends on the number of changes that are being made, but if enough changes are being made, it may be more appropriate to simply repeal and replace the current ordinance. That's not to suggest that the program would start from scratch. Presumably existing businesses could transition into the new regulatory structure, but sometimes it can be easier if a lot of changes are being made to an ordinance to simply repeal it and draft an entirely new best practice ordinance using other jurisdictions as an example. The second question is, if the program is going to be made permanent, what types of businesses will be included in that permanent transition? Will it be the existing business types that you see with check marks next to them? And currently that includes storefront retail, cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, laboratory testing. Fewer business types, it's possible to no longer allow some of those to operate. For example, I don't believe there are currently any laboratory testing facilities within the community. So in theory, you could remove that as an allowable use and not impact any existing businesses. Alternatively, do you want to allow more business types to operate within the city? And there are a few more consumer-oriented that aren't currently allowed, and that includes non-storefront retail delivery. So these are facilities that are closed to the public that can deliver to the city. Consumption lounges, which I spoke about previously, or temporary special events. Both consumption lounges and temporary special events are fairly uncommon across California today, but some jurisdictions are beginning to explore that space. The third policy question is the number of retailers, specifically for that business type. And the question is, should the city maintain, increase, or decrease the number of available retail licenses? The first option, which is to maintain, would mean that only the existing 4 retailers would be permitted to operate. It does avoid having to conduct a new application process. The city could increase the number. The city council would first have to decide upon what is the appropriate number. And it may require the city to then complete a new application selection process, which is very complicated and can be contentious depending on the process that's used. And then finally, the third option would be to decrease the number. Once again, the city would need to decide what is the appropriate number, but have to also recognize that there are 4 existing businesses. So what would be the process to determine which businesses would be able to continue operating? Policy question number 4 is the number of non-retail businesses. So the specific question is, should the city set a cap on the number of non-retail licenses? If you recall, there is currently a cap in place for retail. There is no cap currently on non-retail licenses. As I explained earlier, there's not incredible demand for wholesale licenses currently. The market has changed fairly dramatically from where it was at the outset of legalization in California. So I don't expect a lot of interest in the short term for non-retail licenses within the city. However, if you are amending the program, you want some certainty over they're not meeting or exceeding a certain number of those business types, you could also set a cap on non-retail cannabis uses. The next policy question, number 5, relates to the public benefit fee. And the question is, should the city continue utilizing development agreements to generate a public benefit fee or transition to a cannabis business license tax? And in summary, for the development agreement, again, retail businesses are currently being charged 5.25% of gross receipts fee, or a minimum payment of $25,000 up to $45,000 monthly if the 5.25% rate does not meet or exceed that amount. It's important to recognize that development agreements as a tool do create an administrative burden for applicants as well as for city staff. There are a number of steps that both that business and the city have to go through to implement, track, renew those development agreements. As I stated earlier, through the current fee structure, smaller businesses pay a higher effective rate due to the flat fee and the percentages that it accounts for their gross receipts, the less and less revenues that they generate. Business license tax currently requires voter approval of 50% plus 1. However, that may change. There is currently a state initiative pending that may increase it to 2/3 majority for general purposes. The business license tax could be structured to have the existing DAs expire and the businesses transition to the new tax structure, whatever it is, upon approval. The next key policy question relates to zoning. Should the city adjust cannabis zoning requirements? To clarify, the city could stick with the current regulations that are in existence today, but it is a key question. First and foremost, there are standard zoning requirements for all cannabis activities. Those are the allowable zones. Again, generally speaking, wholesale businesses are allowed in more industrial zones. Retail businesses are generally allowed in more commercial areas, but also includes parts of downtown. Will that change? Is that something that the city is interested in amending to further restrict or expand the allowable areas? There are also conditional use permit requirements. I want to point out that it's common for cities and counties to require conditional use permit for the wholesale businesses, cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, simply due to the impacts that they have on the environment and the surrounding community. It's less common for retailers. So some communities don't require a conditional use permit as long as retailers are locating in commercial zones. So I just flag that as an option if it's something that the city wanted to explore for retailers specifically. I don't have this on the slide here due to lack of space, but I also want to point out that the sensitive use buffers are also something that could be adjusted. Currently, they're 600 feet, which is the state default from schools, commercial daycare centers, and youth centers. Cities have the option to expand those buffers, to reduce those buffers, eliminate those buffers, or to recognize new buffers for sensitive uses that the state doesn't recognize by default. Some cities also set distance buffers between retail cannabis businesses to avoid overconcentration. The last policy question that we've identified for today includes how the city should prioritize some of these key policy changes. I just want to emphasize that trying to tackle all policy amendments at once to perfect a program can result in significant delays. If you are simultaneously trying to adopt a tax measure alongside expanding the allowable areas that businesses could go, or restricting them, which would require a zoning ordinance adoption, while changing the regulatory program, while also considering new business types that might exist in the city, that will result, from what we've seen, in delay in everything. So prioritizing whatever policy changes you want to see, if any, is really important for staff to then be able to prioritize within their existing workloads and accomplish each item in a timely fashion. The last item I include here is to recognize that there may be other key policy questions that need to be addressed, either raised by the public or the ad hoc committee. So I include here, are there any other policy improvements that the ad hoc committee or public would like to discuss at this time? So with that, I am going to open it up to questions, turn it over to the ad hoc committee. I will keep on the screen the list of policy questions that we have identified, just for reference, if anyone wants to speak to a particular one of them during either public comment or during the ad hoc committee discussions. And thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kaluri. So at this point, I think if it's okay with my committee members, that we'll open it up to the public to hear some feedback, and then we'll bring the discussion back on these policy questions, kind of go one by one to hopefully gain some consensus on where we would like to go further with our investigations. So with that, if I don't have any speaker cards, I don't know if anybody filled one out. They are not required. So I invite anyone up here who would like to speak to one of these items or another item that as it pertains to the cannabis industry in Turlock.
Good evening, Cannabis Ad-Hoc Committee. My name is Angelica Sanchez, and I'm the Director of Government Affairs and Compliance at Perfect Union. We're one of the retailers that's allowed in the city. We opened our doors in September of 2020, so we've been in operation for the past 3 years. We obviously would like you guys to extend and or amend the cannabis pilot program. We're deeply invested in the community. We have employees here that are part of the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, so we provide good union jobs with medical, dental, vision. And I was actually here at the Planning Commission about a month ago, and we were found to be in compliance with the Department of Cannabis Control, the Police Department, and obviously the City of Turlock. So the only thing that we would like to be revisited is the development agreement. With the presentation from HDL, he did mention that the way that the development agreement is structured right now is unfair on small businesses. So the way it's set up right now is it's 5.25%, or a minimum at what we're at is $35,000 a month, which is really high. If we were going to do some math to figure out what the taxes on us right now is, it's 18 to 20%. So I'm just asking that it be revisited because, as he mentioned, in order to hit that max amount, a store would have to make $10 million a year. Otherwise, it becomes an undue burden. In revisiting the taxes that were mentioned earlier, the average tax for most cities and jurisdictions is 5%. So we operate a store in Riverbank, and while the tax is up to 10%, it's flexible. They just put it on the ballot measure as being a max of 10. But the city decided it would be 5%. That way it's not an undue burden. Our biggest competitor right now is the black market, and obviously the black market, the prices are much cheaper. There's not a tax on it, which is keeping folks from coming in and buying legal product. And that is all. Thank you so much for your time.
Good evening. My name is Chelsea Haskins, and I'm the Director of State and Local Licensing at Perfect Union. I'm here to express concerns about the potential elimination of the Cannabis Pilot Program. We understand that there are some reservations about the program and its impact on the community. However, the benefits of the program far outweigh any potential drawbacks. The Cannabis Pilot Program has provided a safe and controlled environment for individuals to purchase legal cannabis products. By eliminating the program, you will push consumers towards unregulated and dangerous sources for their cannabis needs. And as history has shown us, prohibition doesn't achieve the desired result. Rather, it creates an environment where illegal activity will flourish, often without consequence. Additionally, you will deprive the community of the economic benefits of the program. The program has created jobs and contributed to the local economy. As a UFCW unionized retail store, we take pride in employing 11 hardworking individuals. If you remove the program, these dedicated community members would be left without the means to provide for their families. As public servants, both elected and appointed, your stewardship of the economic welfare of your constituency includes economic development, working with local businesses for the betterment of the community, and operating in good faith with community members and businesses that you serve. And in return, local businesses like ours continue to operate in good faith with your city, just as we were found to have been operating in good faith through our development agreement by the Planning Commission on June 1st. By continuing to move the goalposts with respect to implementing sound cannabis policies, you're failing to operate in good faith and overall failing the citizenry of this town. I implore you to uphold the duties that you swore to when taking office. Do not end the Cannabis Pilot Program. Instead, place a cannabis tax on the ballot, a measure that the community can vote fairly on and decide for themselves how they would like to see this program work. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair, members of the committee. Mike Warda here. What isn't before you is what are the problems, right? Nobody's told you what's the problem you're trying to fix. I've identified two in the entire time that I've been working with the program. One of them was that the development agreement had a component of it that if there's an internal change of ownership, that it wasn't tracked properly, and that can be fixed by a development agreement. And I don't think there's a second problem, right? What else is there? I mean, the system is operating the way it was designed. Other than getting rid of the word pilot, which is really the issue before you, do you want to continue with the program or not continue with the program? I really never thought that that was a serious discussion. Maybe it is with some people, but you don't have the police standing in front of you saying we've got a problem, so there's no community issue. I don't know what the community impacts are in terms of anything negative. I've heard nothing negative provided by HDL, members of the community. I just haven't heard anything. You've got money coming in, which was promised. You've got a few underperformers that want to level the so-called playing field, claiming they're a small business, but there's only 4 licenses in the whole city. No other, I mean, let's cap the number of Starbucks in the number of the city. What's the difference, right? You don't regulate. It doesn't make any sense to treat these 4 licenses independently and saying, well, one's a small business, one's not. You've got good competitors. You've got some people that aren't competing for whatever reason. I think HDL, before it comes back to you, should take its time to meet with the operators to see if they have any comments on this, because I don't think they met with any of the operators. HDL conducts extensive audits on all the companies. They haven't identified any problems in their presentation for you to fix. So the question is really, what are the problems that you're trying to fix? You have revenue. You have no police problems. You've got no community complaints. I can tell you that from our perspective, you have 14,000 customers that live in the city of Turlock, 95382 and 95380, that are participating, that are customers. And I'm not quite sure what the issue is. In terms of the cultivators, we only have 2. People aren't rushing out to get cultivation licenses because it's very expensive to build cultivations. And maybe, other information is, what are the market conditions of the product right now? And that's other information that hasn't been provided to you. When this started, this product was, the cultivators were able to sell it for 2 to 3 times more than they're able to now because there's been a change in the market. So looking at what the cultivators are charged is probably something that makes sense to structure it in a way that helps these folks continue, because you've got fluctuations with what the state has done. You've got fluctuations with the black market, but the thing about the black market is it's not what it used to be. It's all the smoke shops in town. They are all selling cannabis. And none of them are licensed, and none of them are paying the taxes, and the DA is in a tough position. They're not prosecuting, and so the PDs all over the county, all over the state, are not going after these folks. I know I'm gone over, but I'm sort of representing a cultivator and a retailer. If you can just indulge me for a second, I'd appreciate it. They're taking 20 to 30% of the market. When, I'm in the top 5% of the age group here, so I can say this now. I wouldn't be able to say this 20 years ago, but I never used to see smoke shops in town. Why do you think there's so many of them popping up everywhere? In Modesto, there's 60, and there's only 8 dispensaries that are licensed. What do you think they're selling there? Why do you think they're so profitable? What's happening here? I mean, those are the issues that the city could look at in terms of law enforcement. But the money that's been raised was intended to help law enforcement to a certain extent, and I think it's heading some of it that way. Some other good uses it's been put to. But again, ask what the problem is that you're trying to solve. My opinion is these development agreements are working just fine. Fix them. They have really powerful teeth in them. If you've got a bad operator, you can get rid of them. And you don't have to replace them. There's no obligation to replace a bad operator. Right now, you can look at the revenues. What are the revenues from each store? If you're a landlord and these 4 are your tenants, or all these operators are your tenants, what do you expect from your tenants? Take a look at that, and those are the issues. I mean, I think focus on the business issues here. Again, in terms of the cultivations, there's no even reason to address trying to put a cap on there or doing on there. Look at them one at a time. You've got a planning commission and you've got a city council that are vested with discretion to determine whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. There's no reason to create these rules that take the discretion away from elected officials. I oppose those. And I think you should too. Leave it in the hands of city council. But again, nobody's rushing in for cultivation licenses right now because it's so expensive to build these things out. I'm available to answer any questions if you have them. I have a ton more information, and so if you want to hear more, I can come back up after to see how many people are left. But I also think sort of a group discussion at some point might be a good idea with one of your meetings and bring in, some of the stakeholders to this 3-minute thing is, I know you have to do it for this meeting, but it's kind of restrictive. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. And I did fail to mention that, typically we have a 3-minute, we will keep it up to 5. So thank you for anyone would like to participate.
Hello, everybody. My name is Darren Silva. I operate 4 cannabis dispensaries. Our brand is Cali Kosher. We have the property at 600 D Street. I operate greenhouses in Patterson, nursery distribution. We're a vertically integrated cannabis company. I'm just going to start at the top, on your guys' initial keys and questions, and definitely should extend whatever program you're going to call it, whether it be pilot or not, or just the cannabis program. Definitely extend it. On the new type of businesses, I don't understand why there's not delivery allowed, especially for the guys, the companies and businesses that are already doing retail. Everybody else gets to deliver coffee, food. You got Grubhub, you got all these other things that are delivering whatever it is that they want to deliver. So I think that you guys should really think about, having the non-storefront delivery retails activated. We have a delivery in Oakdale, delivery in Modesto, delivery in Patterson, and by God, we deliver to Turlock because there's no delivery in Turlock. Not everybody wants to walk into a retail store. Some people want to keep it discreet at their home. They don't want to go out in public, and they want to get their products and consume them however they desire. So I definitely think that you guys should consider that. Also, those that are vertically integrated, that are trying to do the grow, manufacture, distribution, the only piece of their puzzle that they're missing is the retail store, right? We're able to grow our own product, manufacture our own product, distribute our own product, but we don't have the retail location in this town, to push our products out if there is an issue with selling them on the wholesale market or across California. It'd be a lot easier for those who are growing to have their own retail store. So I think that is a thing that should be added for those who are vertically integrated. There's only two, and one of us is probably already on that list for a retailer that applied for it. That's down the line on number 6 or 7 or whatever. Let's see. Zoning, yeah, I think you guys can work on opening it up, and of course keeping it away from the schools and the the youth centers and stuff like that. That makes sense. I do agree with that, but there are other areas that we could expand and give other opportunity for retailers. Like Mike said, in regards to the growers and the distributors and stuff like that, they're only going to come flocking to here if there is the right development agreement put in front of them, that's going to be more cost effective than it would be in another jurisdiction. How to prioritize the changes? I think prioritizing the changes would be to just look at what is your income, and is your income fair, right? The $45,000, if you only produced $300,000 a month, let's do some easy math. Your COGS, or cost of goods sold, are 60% of that, so it's around 170, 180,000. I give 45,000 to you guys. You got 225,000 bucks. And then you got 75,000 to pay all your employees, pay rent, pay this, pay that, and insurance and all the other things that come along with it. So I think just putting a tax forth, a fair tax, something that competes with the black market, and not a tax or this amount, because not everybody can pay $45,000 if you're not doing $1 million a month. So I think you guys just consider just a flat rate tax, whatever the retailers collect. You guys collect. It's really hard to fudge the numbers at the retail end of everything, because everything is reported to state, it's reported to CDTFA, it's ran through metric, it's ran through a point of sale system, so it's heavily looked at by more than one person, and then the papers get submitted to you and you guys get your cut, and that's what I see that's going to end up happening at Stanislaus County, because I think our fee at Stanislaus County right now is $415,000 a year. So if we didn't have delivery and our retail running the way it is, we would be paying out of our pocket to meet that, whatever it is, $110,000 every quarter. I think is something like that, $105,000 every quarter. So if we stopped our delivery, we'd have to shut down our business 100%, because we wouldn't be able to pay that, and that's what's happening. So I think for these retailers, that would be something to consider, so that they have longevity with you guys as the city. Other high-level improvements, cannabis is here to stay throughout the state. You see more states that are coming forth with legalization, and I think for you guys to continue to battle the black market, add more retails, work on those taxes. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask anything. I'll be here. Thank you, guys.
Good evening. I feel like this is deja vu again, except we have lots of new faces. So I'm Mary Jackson, and I spoke very strongly against this, the entire way the city went about it, approximately back in 2018, 2019, 2020. And so luckily I'm really good about being a pack rat and saving everything. And so I went by, and I'm going to give you sort of a rundown of what happened, and that I look at the key policy questions, and no disrespect to HDL, but they weren't here. And it was very frustrating to be told different things. I think Mr. Reap was probably the only one who was here. And it's not the truth, and it's not what happened. And so we're told by Mr. Statler, who worked at Firehouse, come on down, come, you can have a tour. I went in twice. I asked him to come and see Osborne. Never did. I asked him 3 times between July and October of 2019. That's just one example. Replacing, I feel frustrated for the businesses that are here. We only have 2 of the 4 that are. But it's just, I feel like this whole thing needs to be looked at and gone through with a fine-tooth, honest, and transparent comb. Because we've been looking at who gives money to who, and it's just amazing. I don't understand why $6,000 was given to someone who voted no. But I'm going to digress. I want to go back to what happened, because it really wasn't talked about. In August of 2019, our then police chief asked them not to have it at 600 feet, but to have it from 1,000 feet. The only 2 dispensaries you have, and I want to make this very clear, I'm speaking as a voter, as a citizen, not as a school board member, but as someone whose children went to Osborne. I have no skin in the game anymore, but we do have family and friends, kids that are still there. Your 2 dispensaries that are in town are less than 600 feet or 680 feet from 2 public schools on the west side. I have a problem with that. I've always had a problem with that. I'm not against dispensaries. I want them in industrial areas. I say that every time I speak. Back in August of 2019, at the same meeting, 7 Osborne parents spoke. One of the women worked at the Stockton Bank, where gunmen came in to rob them, took a hostage, a female employee, and she was actually killed in the high-speed pursuit. She came up here and spoke and talked about that fear. And it's that type of things that we have fear, because it is 30 seconds from the intersection to get onto the freeway. At least there's 3 stoplights, as I told the owners from Washington, with the other one over by Cunningham. On October 8th, 2019, the Turlock Unified School District Superintendent, Dana Trevathan, came out and laid out her personal concerns about the dispensary. That was less than 600 feet from Osborne. And the kids walking for the new Roselawn campus, which has been opened. One of the attorneys who spoke, Mr. Warda, said, there's no kids, that he didn't take any pictures. Well, I think it was either spring break or it was summer. There were no kids walking. I have photos of kids walking. Go down there. Look yourselves. Not right now, because it's under major construction. It's the plant manager of Evergreen Manufacturing, the box company across the street, Kitty Corner, was adamant and spoke against it in 2019. So there was a huge group of people from very different walks of life that spoke against it. We were made all kinds of promises and nothing materialized. So I really think you need to look at the zoning. I'm really not excited about going to talk about this for a ballot measure. I think we keep what we have. What I find interesting is the number of retailers. We don't even have 4 open right now. And so I look at that and go, why don't you wait and see what happens until after that 4? But I think a lot of the pilot program needs to be seriously reviewed. It's not going to go away. I agree with the people speaking, and I understand the black market situation. But again, I've been to so many dispensaries in California. I never thought I would do this. But Sirius has them in industrial areas. Look at where they are in other communities. And I actually have the police reports that I pulled and asked for, and I sent them to some of you. And it shows the increase. The days in calls have gone from 2 to 5 to like 22 to 25 a year. It's all documented. Firehouse was supposed to clean it up. And so it's really troubling to me that no one is here is anyone here from our police department? But there are issues. And it's a safety thing. I don't want to be proven right. I don't want to be right, and that's not why I'm here speaking. But again, I would like this to be a very transparent, open, and honest discussion. And if there's a timeline, because we're in the middle of summer, I couldn't get a hold of the principal at Osborne. We have a new principal from before. Our superintendent is out of town everyone's on vacation. It's summer. Parents aren't here, and parents are concerned. Thank you.
Anyone anyone else wishing to speak at this point before we kind of take it back and go through each comment?
Byron Bogard, I'm here representing Evergreen Marketplace. And the one thing, I'll just kind of talk a little bit about what Mr. Warder said. You know, I'm hearing this, I'm listening, I've been going through the process with all of you, trying to get this new one opened. And there aren't any problems. Things are running pretty smooth. I'm not hearing any problems up there. So I just would reiterate that. And then the second thing that I want to reiterate is I can appreciate the need for the city to hire HDL. But if I was in your position, I would make sure that HDL is actually talking to the operators and really understanding this marketplace rather than just taking statewide data and trying to, make it fit for this local community, because it doesn't always work that way. And we experienced that same thing in Stanislaus County. Thank you.
All right, well, seeing no one else running up to come speak with us, I will look to my committee members, and we're going to kind of just sort of talk about each of these one by one and see if we can come to some either consensus or just get everybody's ideas out there. To the first question, yes, thank you for... These slides are much easier to look at, so thank you very much. And do we still have Mr. Kaluri on the line if we need to speak with him?
Yes, I'm here, and I can also hear you.
Oh, you can hear me now. Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
We're having some technical problems at the beginning. I will lead the discussion on this first one because we included it because this was the overarching kind of first question to discuss, but I will contend that this is not exactly the decision of the cannabis committee right now. It has been my intention as the chair of this, in working with staff and working with our consultants, to say that it is, we cannot decide if we're going to sunset or extend or make permanent. That is something that will be eventually brought forth to the city council. But it is my intention that we will kind of go through all of these things under the assumption that we will make suggestions for improvements. So if anyone else has anything to share in their thoughts on this particular topic, I would welcome them now.
So at this point, we're considering the question of whether to continue the program as a whole. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, and just with the caveat that it's not really our committee's decision on that, but to understand what our recommendations would be for the council.
Correct. So having been here from the beginning of when this program was created, and looking at what are the harms versus benefits that I'm aware of in the community, I'm not seeing any good reason to sunset the program from what I know and what I'm aware of. Most of you know I work in healthcare. I'm not an advocate of cannabis use, but I'm an advocate of being fair to the businesses in our community. And if we're going to allow businesses in our community, then we have an obligation to create an environment where they can be successful.
I piggyback on that and what Jim just said as well. I think I came on board right after the ad hoc committee the first time around finished, and we were going through the first DA applications and everything like that. Speaking from a planning commission perspective, before I go there, I don't see a reason really to sunset the program at all. There's great room for improvement at almost every level. I do agree with HDL's comment during the presentation not to bite off more than we can chew, probably, or rephrase that. And then from a planning commission perspective, there is some cleanup. Whether we either amend or replace our current process, there's some cleanup and a lot of frustration that could be eliminated from the process, probably both for applicants and operators, as well as for staff and for the commission itself. So,
I, too, am in healthcare, as most folks know. I'm not a necessarily an advocate of cannabis, but I really don't care what you want to put in your body if it's your choice. I mean, it is legal in the state. I think that we've got 3.5 million reasons to make this a better program as far as what it can do for our city. I think the questions have been asked with the police department specifically about issues in and around the cannabis dispensaries and have not had virtually no significant problems. Can't say that with the bars downtown. You can't say that with the liquor stores downtown. I know it's a tough thing, but I think it's a matter of cleaning up the process, making it again. If we choose to have it here, we need to have it so it's successful for the business people. There's the public benefit from it too, and let's move forward.
I agree, and I think we're in consensus then that, you know, it is our work to see how we can improve this and make this better and make a policy that is kind of, you know, right-sized for our community, and is fair to the business owners, and, you know, addressing some of the community concerns that were heard the first time around, what we've learned from administration and staff as we've had these years of experience. I suppose we'll move on to question number 2, and as was presented earlier, as we are looking at what we want this program to look like in the city of Turlock, you can see we do allow several of the options for different types of businesses. This is an opportunity to evaluate if we want to look into these different types of businesses. I, for one, would like to understand a little bit more about the delivery aspect, and I know that there's kind of some legal issues on delivery that have come up before, so looking to the future on what we might get, I would like to investigate how delivery would work, especially since there are operators that are delivering into Turlock. Is that causing a problem? Is that an opportunity for revenue again?
So, question for staff. My recollection is that the retailers have delivery as an option. They're permitted to provide delivery within Turlock.
Yes.
Is any of the current business in operation, are they delivering now? No. The answer was no.
So then are there requirements that we have that they have to meet in order to do that, or is that just a choice that they make within their business?
It's my understanding it's a business choice. That's something that if we'd like, we can contact our existing retailers to understand if there are city place reasons or constraints that they're not doing delivery or what that looks like, if you'd like more information on that.
So Mr. Warda, yeah, would you be able to speak to that? You
5 minutes.
Sure.
And this really is intended to be that kind of workshop for, you know, anyone who would like to let us know. We'll open this back up again to the public at. Would you like to speak now?
We do delivery, so one of the reasons why people probably don't do delivery is the liability, the cars on the road. That's one thing that we're finding with it is, you know, a lot of wrecked cars just being out there daily. I think we have 12 cars that do delivery every day, and we deliver from Fresno all the way to Stockton, right out of Modesto. So I think it's liability. People on the road for long hours, and sometimes, just to be quite honest with you guys, you get robberies. Some people will stick up the car and rob. So people kind of stay away from that because you don't have security. You lose the security aspect. You do have a camera in the car, but you don't have, a camera for your surroundings as you would at your retail location. So I just think it comes down to liability, and the operators here just don't want to accept that liability. That's what I think it is. Yeah.
Thank you. I have a comment on it a little bit. If we had the non-storefront delivery, in theory, I mean, is it something to think about? So in the example of delivering out of Modesto, wherever that whatever Modesto or county jurisdiction is collecting the sales tax, even for other areas. So they're drinking from somebody else's milkshake, to quote the movie. Well, Turlock, if you think about the delivery that's happening in and around Turlock, those are going to be more common routes. If we had people based here, we'd have fewer accidents here as compared to further away from the home base, and we would then be able to collect those dollars possibly.
So the information I have is it is primarily a liability issue, and it's also a security issue, because the wrong people figure out that they can get a delivery person by themselves at a location, and it puts them at risk. And so at least the folks I represent don't want to engage in it and just don't think it's worth the risk.
And then just from a profession standpoint, from an insurance standpoint on it, it's very expensive. And then also you have to limit the amount of quantity of cash and product combined. So if you go over $800 or $1,000 in any vehicle, your insurance exponentially increases in cost. You're going from close to $8,000 to $10,000 per power unit per year to 15, 20 plus. And then you're talking about how many times you have to cycle back and forth to the home base to get deliveries in to actually make it feasible. You're going to burn out employees too.
Did I see another hand that wanted to participate in that?
No, that was just me saying that the max you can carry is $3,000 worth of product in your car at one given time.
Okay. Good. Okay. Gentlemen, anything else that we would like to say about the business types going forward?
Cassie, I'm sorry. Could you explain again what Matt just talked about? Because it was hard to hear back here.
Yes. So for anyone listening on the microphone, the question was about the liability, right? Could you explain that? You can do that.
Like, why would they deliver from that discussion, the delivery from outside, how it happens, and why we don't do it?
So, I think Mr. Silva could probably answer this question too a little bit more accurately on how the sales come through the establishment. But these are either phone, online, or other electronic media or means to make a purchase. So if I went online right now and purchased from his store in Modesto, it could in theory be delivered to me at my home, if they're still open. Modesto is getting the tax revenue for a sale in Turlock. And then if we had my thought is if we have non-storefront delivery here or storefront delivery, those deliveries to and from, or those routes to and from Turlock residents are probably much safer routes on the road than if we have somebody who's already spent 10, 15, 25 minutes in the vehicle in traffic after 6 hours of already being in the vehicle all day, getting to and from our town.
Well, I'm just going to make the assumption I'm hearing that temporary special events, consumption lounges does not seem like an area of interest moving forward. So,
Might be
speak
interesting
now.
to somebody. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me. Why don't we have consumption lounges? So what is your guys' reasoning for not wanting them when we have bars where people sit and drink alcohol and they leave drunk and get DUIs and people show up and shoot people in the head? So what's the difference between a consumption lounge where they're consuming cannabis, or the difference between the bar right down the road that they're sitting there getting drunk? I mean, they can't even function properly. Some of them are stumbling out of the damn place. You don't see nobody stumbling out of a cannabis dispensary. Everybody is still functionable. When you're on alcohol, we all know I shouldn't even have to have a conversation about it. We'll smoke 3 joints right here. You guys drink a whole bottle of alcohol, and we'll see who's standing straight after and who can still function and do business. So on the consumption lounge thing, yes, we gotta have the proper ventilation and stuff like that in there, right? So that doesn't affect the businesses around us, as we do with our cannabis grows and our cannabis dispensaries. So with the consumption lounge, and again, it's the person's choice whether they want to walk into the consumption lounge or not, if there is one available. At this point, what do? You walk down the street, you go hang out at the park. Where do these people go to network? Because that's what happens at bars, that's what happens at restaurants. You network, you drink, you meet people. Same thing's going to happen at the consumption lounge, just everyone's going to be a little calmer and a little hungrier. But you're not going to see anybody in there fighting. You're not going to see people beating each other up. You're not going to see, they're not going to go rob the place because there's nothing for sale there. It's just a consumption lounge. They'd have to get their product. They'd have to go to the store, purchase it, or have it delivered to that location because it does have an address. So I think the consumption lounge thing, and that's another revenue stream for the city as well. So we're looking at a consumption lounge like it's taboo, like it's something that is just out of this world, and it's not out of this world. It's a place where you go to consume cannabis, and there isn't anywhere to do it. We've created the retail stores, we've created the grows, we got deliveries, we got everything else. Now where do you go to consume it? We got bars everywhere. How many bars do we have downtown? I think we just got another one approved, right, at the old Al's. Am I right? I think so. So bars are just popping up. They got approved right after the guy got killed. So that's wild to me that people are so against the cannabis when the alcohol is taking lives every day. I'm sure somebody up here has had someone that died from a DUI or a DUI driver or was. Hopefully you guys haven't, but somewhere it's inevitable. Somebody along the line has experienced that. Now when we go for the, it's been talked about forever. How many people have died from cannabis? There's not a list. There's just not a list. So I think the consumption lounge should be considered. So that's why I ran up here, because it looked like it wasn't even a discussion. And I think you guys need to think about that a little bit more, because then again, consumption lounge, someone purchases the real estate, they need to do TIs, they need to do stuff. That's money for you guys for permits and so on and so forth. So, and it's a lot easier pill to swallow to open a consumption lounge than it is a retail or a grow or a manufacturing, right? It's just a place for people to go lounge and maybe eat some food or something like that. And the temporary special event while we're at it, we were going to have that event that was supposed to happen at the Stanislaus County Fairgrounds. I don't know what happened to it. It's above my pay grade to know what happened to it, but we just had Beer Fest, guys. You guys had Beer Fest at Stanislaus County Fairgrounds. What's the difference to having the Cannabis Fest? Let people walk around and try out different cannabis because they're walking around trying out alcohol. How many people stumbled out of that place? How many people left drunk? How many people went home and beat their wives because they were drunk, right? That stuff happens. I hate to tell you guys, but that's the reality of it. And for some reason, we're not looking at the facts and the reality. We're just going off of, oh my God, it's cannabis, it's bad, or we'll put a little bit of it out there, but we're not going to go full. You're either in or you're out, So I know it's not completely your guys' decision, it's your recommendation, but hopefully this puts a little insight for the people listening, for you folks up there, and you guys can relay those messages down the line to whomever else you need to. But
Thank you.
Please.
Thank you.
Yes.
To touch on this real quick, if we're putting consumption lounges and temporary special events on the table, but we aren't permitted to bring in food trucks to our parking lot for like a holiday event. This is the only city where we can't do that. So maybe we can, open up that discussion again if we're going to consider restructuring the program. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, maybe the consumption lounge stuff is too far for the city, at least right now, but by having the ability for the, city council to make a decision on the temporary special events, I think would be important for us to at least move that discussion forward. It doesn't guarantee anything, doesn't mandate anything, but it does give the Planning Commission and the council the power in the future to, whether it's allow food trucks, for events, or whether it's something more like, a Cannabis Fest type event, at least that power goes back and the ability to do it. Because as you guys have seen just in the last couple of years with this industry, it changes really fast, and it'll allow the Turlock to be more progressive and ready to say yes in the future.
To the providers, is there a consumption lounge in Modesto? Not yet. Okay, and then my other question is, so food trucks were not allowed, and are they allowed in Modesto?
Food trucks?
Yes.
Allowed where?
Like outside of I would say in the parking lot, or when you have a.
Dispensaries?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, because I know for when we looked at this before, the hotel in Modesto on McHenry, it's behind the old Shangri-La buffet. I'm by Pet Boys. I hope that gives you an idea where, I can't remember what it's called. I should know that. But there's also a Days Inn right next to it. And they had huge issues with people getting their marijuana and then going into the parking lot and smoking. So if you had a consumption lounge, it sort of stops a lot of those issues. At least that's what I have heard in the past.
Mr. City Attorney.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out about the temporary special event. It was mentioned that there was one planned for Turlock. It was at the fairgrounds, so we don't really have permitting authority over that. We were involved in, for the security plan and stuff. But on that, because the fairgrounds is here, and we could see that coming back, I think the staff recommendation is maybe to have the consultant work up at least some basic information on that for us. So even if we're not doing it, we understand the implications if they're held at the fairgrounds.
I think that's a fair point. And since the consultants was mentioned, Mr. Cooley, if you're still on the line, do you have any information to share on the prevalence of consumption lounges or anything, any information you can give to us now, or we can continue this on to another meeting conversation?
I'm sorry, if that was a question for HDL, I could not hear it. Katie, could you repeat the question? Sure, and that's a great question. I don't have statistics on the numbers throughout the state. That is something that we can get back to you on if you want that information. The one thing I would point out about consumption lounges generally is, unlike the other business types, retail, manufacturing, distribution, cultivation, even temporary special events, there aren't a lot of state regulations in place current related to consumption lounges. They are allowed, but the requirements at the state level are fairly minimal, such as no odors outside the facility, no visibility inside, one or two other requirements. But on the whole, the regulatory requirements are imposed at the local level. And in many cases, local jurisdictions are on their own when it comes to developing the permitting process, the regulatory requirements, and so forth. There are local jurisdictions to look at to consider copying or following the work that they've already done in this space. West Hollywood is a great example. San Francisco, I know, allows consumption lounges. There are other jurisdictions that could be looked at. But just in terms of being able to rely upon the state, it's not so much there as it is for the other license types. So it is a bit of a heavier lift than the other business types. But again, something that has been done in other jurisdictions and can be done if that's a policy direction from the city.
Thank you for that context. Committee members, anything else we'd like to share?
Yeah, I would be very interested to hear other communities' experiences with consumption lounges and, unintended consequences and complications that they might have had.
I'm not sure how it would even, if there's interest in somebody opening one around here, I'm not sure if it would make much sense, business sense.
I think getting some information back is great, and we can look at that too. But also, whatever we do going forward for expansion or revision to the program, we should have some vehicle open for evolution of business, right? Things like that. I do agree that having somewhere for people to congregate and partake could be beneficial. You see families at the Dust Bowl, you see people that go to bars. I personally don't like seeing people get drunk and drinking beer at the city parks. I know you're not supposed to, but we only have so much law enforcement to go around. and where you're going to partake of cannabis right now outside of your home. You know, you can't get more than 10, 20 people in a living room usually, so it might be something for us to really consider.
Thank you. Let's move on to question number 3, to the concept of the limit of 4 retailers. It was not presented, and I don't have my notes directly in front of me, but I mean, I think there is some local precedent for having a limit of retailers. The county has it. Modesto does for sure. I'm sure our friends here in the audience could help us out with that too. But I think it is, seeing as we only have 2 maybe fully functional retailers right now, that 4 does feel like an appropriate number for the city currently.
My concern with citing the 4 is that we've had a pretty drastic delay with 2 of them being developed out. So I don't think my personal opinion, being around it for so long now and dealing with it from the planning commission level, is that I would take those statistics of looking just at the 4 we have now and the length of time we've had with a grain of salt, because I mean, one of them just opened 2-3 months ago, maybe not even. So we don't have any data on them, and then the 4th one unfortunately still has not opened yet, and we're coming close to 3, 4, 5 years in. I think this question may be difficult to answer in a vacuum by itself as well, without looking at the tax side or the public benefit at the same time. Because if we were to look at, we could look at even just removing the limit completely, the market's going to throttle it down. You've seen that in the distribution cultivation side of the business already, right? So my opinion is that we probably need to look at this in conjunction with that other question as well.
So, my thoughts on the magic number of 4, my concern is that, have we missed out on any opportunities for another retailer to come in and be successful because there weren't any open spots? The process of becoming one of the selected 4 is a massive process. I understand that the existing operators have made major investments to get on that list. But going down the road, I'm not convinced that that process is necessarily, I don't know that it needs to be that difficult. And I don't know the appropriate vehicle to simplify the process, but it just seems like it's a pretty heavy lift to get to the point where somebody can open. And I think there's the potential for other good businessmen to be out there that just can't do that lift.
Sure, we'll take comments. Brief, please.
City of Fresno issued 21 licenses. They've got 2 opened. The barrier to entry is really tough. People are having a hard time. You got to find a location that fits the parameters. You've got to do a lot of things. And so I'm not saying 4 should be the limit or not be the limit. I mean, my client is fine with the 4 because I think that it's going to be difficult for a lot of people to compete with them. But you're not alone. Don't think that you're missing the boat because, like I said, in Fresno should have 10 operational dispensaries based on its population. They have 2. And their program started, they started a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. And I think there's only 6 of them that are like in the conditional use permit process. The others are just sitting there doing nothing. And some of them are trying to sell their licenses. So I just don't want you to think you're missing the boat. I don't think it's a priority, but however you want to deal with it.
Looking back at just the revenue that we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years, it's pretty flat. the number 4 is what it is. I mean, that's what was set before we ever were here. It could be 6, it could be 10, it could be 2. I mean, if you make it 10, the market will dictate.
Well, I'd say that we should maintain the 4. We still don't know what the other 2 stores, the other store coming online, what the market's going to look like whenever, they are in operation. And when you think about the market share, Turlock has a set market share. And right now the pie is cut in 4 slices. So adding more retailers, all you're doing is cutting each slice of pie a little bit smaller for each person, and you're going to get the same amount of tax revenue no matter what, because there's only so many people in the city of Turlock that are purchasing cannabis. So just something to keep in mind.
I don't know. I have a little bit of a different opinion on that. When we first saw the first 4 permit or applications, whatever we call them, at the Planning Commission, there were different styles of store too. And I think you look at that, it's like styles of restaurants, right? You're gonna have different clientele going. You're gonna have those that want the fast food experience, the 7-Eleven experience. You're gonna want the ones that want the, Sprouts experience of grocery shopping or whatever it is, right? And the ones that want the Apple Store. I remember we saw that one, right? They had the big bank account and they never actually did anything. But where I'm going with it is that, if we have a blend of that, I think that could also attract people from, because where are people from Denair going? I know we saw on the map, it looked like they had a dispensary there, but are they all really buying there? We can attract them in if we have the right operators. And then my second point is to follow Mr. Warda's is that, I don't know if 4 is the magic number is right, kind of like what we've talked about, but what we've seen is a delay in 2 of them. What if there was a 5th applicant or a 6th applicant that was allowed the opportunity to build out? Yes, one of the other slower to move operators may have had to abandon a license, and unfortunately they'd have lost the fees. But at least we would then have data, because right now, it's kind of hard to evaluate the numbers when we only have 50% of the operators reporting. Sorry.
I was just going to give a little bit of historical context to it, because it was sold to all of us back in 2018, 2019 as a pie. You sliced the pie up. The city attorney at the time had the chart up there, and that was the justification for the fees on the DAs and having the minimum amounts. So I think you have to balance that with the context of the conversation that you guys were just having, as far as having different type of operators, smaller businesses, all that type of stuff. You can't have both. It doesn't work. And I think that's a little bit of Mr. Warda's comments about just the city of Fresno. They even have social equity applicants that they give money to that they're not even having to pay money out of pocket, and yet they still can't get up and going. I'm actually helping somebody down there with that. And those are real issues, because it is tough. So I just, and that's why I'm here today, because I want to make sure that all of you guys know the whole history so that we can make this program better.
Well, I think going back, I hate to keep going back historical, but again, there were local people here that applied, and I don't know where Mr. Silva lives, but there was someone else here when we were at the Planning Commission City Council meeting, this very short, brief one that was about, 3 months ago, where they were told that, go ahead, apply. They had already been, I believe, maybe selling, not quite legally. But it's just really frustrating when we don't see anybody locally. I don't know if that's a funding issue or trying to raise capital. But again, that was something that we were told, go, local people were told to apply, but it was almost like the sign was already closed for them. And that was frustrating.
Just a general remark. I think the market is absorbed what's capable. That's why there's 2 actually operating, one that's just getting started, and the other one's got a ways to go still, for whatever reasons. But I think the other thing that we should discuss tonight, if we can, is the idea that these smoke shops are selling this stuff retail, and we've got a bunch of smoke shops around town that are selling cannabis products across their counters, and they're not licensed for that. So they're, in my opinion, they're doing something illegal.
I agree, and thank you for bringing that point up, because I believe it was brought up by Mr. Warda already that yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense for us to sit up here and have a great ordinance that limits retailers and has a whole regulatory scheme if it's so easy for, you know, the shop around the corner to be circumventing everything that we're doing. You know, I don't think, I don't know what we can come up with on that particular issue, but I do think that is an issue that we need to bring forth and come up with a plan of how to address that and see what else, what's happening elsewhere and how they're addressing it.
I think it comes back to, I forgot your name, but from Evergreen Market mentioned it, and I mentioned it earlier, is that it's hard to look at the number of licenses without also considering the public benefit cost that's involved. Because if we were to have smaller operators that have a smaller, you know, niche piece of the pie, they're not going to meet a $45,000. Their gross revenue might not even be $100,000 a month, right? So you can't have 40-50% of your revenue go to that. I think if we did that, you'd look at also the possibility of a better product offering, maybe not the product itself, but a service offering to the customer, you know, and more, and that would draw more patrons in as well. And lastly, just to kind of address Ms. Jackson's comments about the last time we went through this kind of process in the very beginning, I'll speak for myself and not anyone else at the table, but I had a great deal of frustration in that process, and I felt there were certain things from the former city attorney that were said one way and things were to be addressed in certain sets of meetings. Then we get to those meetings and then we were told it's too late to address matters. So my goal and why I volunteered for the committee here is also that we can have the open discussion and just have, you know, we can't ever do a one and done in government, but we can at least do our best to make sure, okay, we hear everything, we do everything we can, and make sure the regulation is fair for all.
So a comment on the smoke shops issue. You know, it sounds like a PD issue, you know, where it needs to be explored just how much of this is going on and, you know, what recourse does the city have. You know, I know that, you know, criminal penalties are difficult to get anything done because of the current enforcement environment, but, you know, do we have, you know, other avenues from within the city to impact those businesses that are selling cannabis without proper license?
You know, in reviewing the other Stanislaus County city ordinances, I was impressed by the Waterford ordinance, which placed the tax whether you were operating legally or illegally. So if you think about it, it's like the Al Capone approach, you know. So I think we will be exploring that pretty vigorously, because then you can sort of, you have multiple reasons to address anybody who's operating without city permission. Because that, like the city manager, that's the most disturbing thing, you know, I've heard here tonight, and we got some email information on it. So
just briefly, PD's doing the best it can, I think, but I don't think the DA's office understands the problem yet. It's not that they don't want to do anything about it. I don't think they get it. This is kind of a new thing that's happening, and I think if the cities can get together and approach the DA and saying this is an important issue to us, that the DA's office may look at it and say, okay, we need, and not treat it like a regular sort of cannabis issue, which, you know, it's getting low priority treatment because there's a lot bigger crimes that are happening that they've got to focus their resources on. So that's sort of, it's frustrating for PDs all over when they're doing their action and nobody's taking the case at the DA's office because, again, they don't understand what's happening.
Well, my plan would be to talk with the chief of police and get his feedback in terms of what's going on. We have a code enforcement function in the police department. Now, it's pretty darn busy already. So then you add another 15 smoke shops on top of that. You know, it becomes a resource issue for us as well.
Maybe it's too hypothetical of a question, George, but if we were to do the Al Capone approach, I mean, are there teeth that actually would sink in, because if it's taxed, whether it's legal or not, and they get caught not paying sales tax, do we have recourse against the business and or operator to then file a lien, a judgment, basically shut them down is my question.
yeah, I mean, you can create all of that out of a taxing scheme as well as other ways. So, you know, it's sort of, you know, pretty. It's not a good thing when I say it's an interesting issue, right? It's pretty interesting. pretty interesting issue. I just wanted to mention a few collateral issues to this. The staff took the approach, subject to some criticism, that the best way to bring forward the question of the 5-year term of the pilot program, as many people believe it was sold to the community, was sort of fill the 4 retailer slots, right, with the previous list that was developed out of the original process back in, you all know, I don't remember, 2018, 2019, something like that. So that's the approach that we've taken. And so there are 4 now, 4 that have the retailers that have the ability to operate. So kind of a subset of this is, there's a couple of things. One is, what if one of the retailers just stops operating, right? And so, and they don't want to, they don't transfer the license or something. So, that should be considered. And, is there going to be a process? Does the number go from 4 to 3? Do we go through a new process? I mean, the process was so elaborate, right, that I think that as the industry sort of matures and people understand the business better, I doubt that, what had to be done in that initial process, would be repeated. Now, the other thing is, because our pilot, and again, hindsight's 2020. I don't like to Monday morning quarterback, but one thing in Turlock's program that wasn't considered, that's created a lot of consternation and work and all of that, was whether these licenses really are transferable or not. Now, because of what I'll call the ambiguity in the Turlock program, we've allowed them to be transferred. A consequence of that is, if you stay in this, regime, you're creating value in essentially a government monopoly, oligopoly, right, with a limit of 4 licenses. So the licenses themselves grow in value. And so I'm not sure that was intended, and I'm not sure the city wants to continue with that. And then the last subset is, staff firmly believes that if what I heard earlier, if the cannabis business is going to continue in Turlock, we very much want to end the pilot program. And while somebody mentioned it's certainly it's the words and the ordinances, which I think were kind of a marketing ploy, right, to get it through in more conservative communities. But it does have other consequences, right? Because we have a list of people that went through the process. There's still a ranked list. And so that list just needs to end, because that information's, 4 years old now. So it doesn't make sense to do that. And now that the program has filled out, that's where, unless we hear differently from you or the group that you make your recommendations to, that's part of what staff has been thinking about proceeding with. So they're not like the headline issues, but they're all the details we get to worry about. So.
Thank you. I think that, we definitely, in subsequent rounds of thinking of this, are going to have to come up with what is the best fit for us on what will happen if we keep a limit and then there is an opening again, because it doesn't sound like it was a process that everyone was very happy with. Any final points, gentlemen, on this?
Can I go up?
Can you hold it till the end? Okay, thank you.
About before, if someone drops off, the way you guys did it, that man dropped off, and then the 5th person on the ranking fell in, so the other
Sure.
person doesn't come and go to the 6th person. That's what we understood, and that's what had happened after Nedman left.
Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Silva was explaining how the ranking people moved up when one fell out. My understanding is that would be more related to the pilot program, and
that was
how
the list developed out of the ranking.
Got it. Policy question number 4. Director Contreras, could you go forward for us? And it's just kind of an extension of, if I am looking at number 4, extension of this topic. Do we want to entertain a cap on non-retail? So I will open it up to my colleague.
I think the market will take care of that for us. I don't think we need to limit that.
I piggyback on that, and I believe Mr. Warda said something similar to that effect in his opening or his first comments. We've already seen that the market's already throttled that down for us. You know, I don't think even having an open-ended line on that of looking at a cap, that's something for a future group, future time.
Any quick comments from anybody on this topic, and otherwise we'll move along. If we could progress to number 5, this is the issue of development agreements, business tax versus a business tax. I'll start. You know, from the presentation in January. Our city attorney had a lot to say about, you know, the concept of regularizing a business, and I echo that, and I think that it seems to me that the most appropriate way to go would be to go for it, look into a tax and get the voter approval for this mechanism of revenue.
My understanding is the way we have it now, we're not necessarily protected from the state to come in and say they want a piece of what's going on.
Yeah, I don't think so. Let's ask Mr. Warda, he'll know.
I thought there was some discussion about the way we had it set up that actually that maybe
I don't recall.
making that
I mean,
up.
I don't recall that. So let me try to. I don't. Well, you know what? I think that's been talked about, but I don't know. I haven't looked into it. Is I guess the easiest way for me. You know, I mean, I've got to come up with all those city attorney answers. You know, so it's like so. But we'll put it's you know, I'll look into stuff for you, even if it's not interesting. It's okay. It's okay. So but we'll look at that for sure. You know, just kind of see whether there's some risk to that. But usually with localities, it's the state stuff that they send to us that they lie to you about and take. So and never pay you back, even though they say they're going to.
I was going to just say the same thing. If it was a state tax, okay, and the state was collecting it, okay, they could probably, through legislative act, keep it like they do with the transportation money every year during the budget process, for example. They cut transportation money back. But I don't think they have the ability to do that in this particular tax.
I think, you know what, staff should also, we should put the rest of our thoughts on this table, because with the Development Services Director, she and I have been thinking about this, you know, and even, you know, since January, and as the workup for these meetings. And so I think at this point, what we're thinking is, it's just not a binary choice of, you know, development agreements or tax. You know, there are some hybrids that I think we're warming up to, because I wasn't able to finish the research, but I believe a number of the cities in Stanislaus County are still using DAs to collect the revenues, but they've all passed these, you know, maximum taxes that you heard about, right? And what I found, the maximum taxes basically are 10% or 15% in the different jurisdictions. So Patterson 15, Oakdale 15, Riverbank 10, Ceres no tax, Waterford 15. So that's what I saw out there. But most of those are still using development, I think, we'll have to confirm it to do it, to collect it. So that's that piece of it. I personally, I think a tax is important to get on the books, because I do have some misgivings of the longevity of development agreements as a device to collect revenue, you know, being its main purpose. But Director Quintero, you know, when she was making some good points to me when we were discussing it, Actually what we might want to do is rotate out of use permits. As you heard earlier, they're kind of unusual for retail. Keep the development agreement as sort of the main vehicle, even for the land use part of it. Keep the conditions of approval, kind of load them into the development agreement. That would make me more comfortable that it's a vehicle, an appropriate vehicle. So, I think is that a fair thing that we we're kind of thinking maybe there's a hybrid in there that we might, we're not ready for a final recommendation, but as you guys discuss and take public comment, we wanted to inform the discussion with our latest thinking.
I would also like to hear what other municipalities are doing, and I mean, we don't need to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
And
yeah, for example, a tax would be very easy to do because there's plenty of examples of that. I mentioned earlier. I mean, I kind of really like that Waterford idea of taxing illegal operators. So there's plenty of examples of that I don't think. So I don't think it. It's always a project, right? But it's there's plenty of good examples for us.
I don't feel that I'm educated enough to provide guidance about what's appropriate DA versus a tax versus a conditional use permit. I just don't have the training. But I am sympathetic to our smaller operators of having that fixed benefit amount per month, and I'd like to see that go away. Whether we wind up with a business tax or whether we do it through DAs, like I said in previous discussions, my concern is safety and being able to vet our operators and being able to set up a system that's easy to understand and easy for them to be successful in.
I would like to just see it more simplified myself. A tax seems to be the fairest. I mean, if we can get there, I think in previous discussions, I think a tax was there is a timeline to get there. I mean, do we need to consider a stepped approach of possibly adjusting the development agreements in preparation of a tax? Maybe we consider eliminating the minimum benefit, or having the scale freeze for now in anticipation of going to a tax. I think we need to be open to those kinds of ideas, and then, because if we go to a tax, then I think that's really the only way to open up smaller operators. Otherwise, the first mover advantage is going to be the monopoly in our town, almost no matter what.
Well, I think you can make recommendations on both topics because the timing of each is we'll see. So,
Comments?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So, pretty much all the taxes that were approved with approving the cannabis program itself. So the incentive for everybody to vote for it was, we get cannabis, sure, we'll pay the tax. We already have cannabis, and now you're going to ask 14,000 people in Turlock to vote to tax themselves. It's not an easy guaranteed win like it was when you're saying, you're going to get cannabis and a tax. Because everybody's like, well, regulate it. Even people that were not for cannabis voted for the tax. And so you were getting, like in Modesto, it passed by 70%. Nothing passes by 70%, right? If you take out the fact that the cannabis program is already there, can you get it passed? So you should do some evaluation, I think, on the political side of it, because this is a political question too, because it's a tax, number one. Number two, is it going to change your income? No, I don't think so. I mean, particularly, and what some of these cities have done is they gave a maximum tax, what they're authorized to collect up to, and they still did the DAs and said, well, this is kind of what's happening with the marketplace. And the nice thing about DAs is you can adjust them based on the marketplace if people are doing, if they're evaluating them when you renew the tax or renew the development agreement. So again, I don't think the tax gets you anything. Again, I go back to the small business argument where folks, when this program started, you had a lot of people pay $5,000 a head or more to say, we'll pay the $45,000 minimum fee. Put us in the system and we'll pay it. And you're only giving out 4 licenses, right? So if you're only giving out 4 licenses, what's the problem with saying you've got a minimum fee that you've got to pay if you're going to do business here? And if you're not going to do business here, if you can't do that, then open it up to somebody else that says, I'll pay the $45,000 minimum because I think I'll do better than that. So I don't see where, and going through the whole process, the burdens of the process that this whole city goes through for a tax, having the discussions, having the public hearings, having everything that's associated with it, it's a heck of a lot of work. So what does it get you? In my opinion, based on what I've seen in lots of different markets, you're getting pretty close to what you're going to get out of the Turlock market with the existing operators that you have. It's possible that if one or two operators, if a different operator was here, you could do better. But I don't think the solution is taking away the minimum fee. I think all it does is reduce the amount of funds that were promised to the community when they said, well, okay, we'll vote for cannabis because we're going to get a minimum $45,000 a month from these businesses. And so you've got a couple of different components, and so I think that the tax is probably not the best idea, not the best move.
I got a little bit different outlook on that. Most everybody's already charging an 8% that goes back. If you look at the development agreements, they're 8% or 5% or, right? So people have already implemented that percentage into the price of the product, right? So 15% excise, you have your sales tax that's 7 point whatever or 8.25, and then people have implemented that 8% and gets us up to around 31%. That 8% that is collected is reported to the county or to the city, and it shows this was our sales that was reported to the state, these were our sales that were reported to the CDTFA, and these are the taxes that are generated from these sales, and this is the number at the end of the month or at the end of the quarter that we are going to pay to the city, county, or whatever, right? Now, if you don't do enough revenue at that 8% to pay $45,000, or in our case $400,000 a year, then you pay that out of your pocket. If you're not making enough profit, you got to go grab it from your savings to pay that bill. Okay, so the fair thing is to continue. Not to continue, but to charge a tax and a tax only, whatever is collected like every other tax gets paid out. So that's what I think, that's what's fair, that's what helps any operator, whether you're doing high volume, you're a small business, low business, you collect your 8%, you pay the 8%, and that's all there is to it. So I just have a little bit different outlook on that. So I know I get a little excited sometimes, and I apologize, but I think there's some good information there.
I forgot to say that I don't know if you're treating retail and cultivation differently or not in this idea. So I wasn't.
We're not really meaning to get to that level of detail, but it right now we have the development agreements have different fee schedules, obviously.
Right. So I think it's a decision that should be looked at, because cultivator is different than retailer. A lot different ways to make money as a retailer than as a cultivator, and I think the cultivators, doing that as a percentage and changing it from what you have now is probably a really good idea, because the price is very volatile, and and retailers benefit, right? If the price drops for what a cultivator can get, the retailer may still be selling everything at the same price and picking up that difference. So I think there should be different treatment for a retailer than there is for a cultivator. It's quite a bit different.
Thank you. Yes, yeah. And that's very much industry practice to have a different fee schedule regardless of the mechanism for the different business entities. So thank you. Point well noted. Well, I think we have a lot more to kind of work with on staff on what our next steps of getting more information on how a development agreement, a tax, a hybrid, what those different things would look like. So I'm going to kind of leave the discussion where it is on that, and then try to allow us to wrap up these last 2 points. Question 6, if we are able to move that on for the public, is the idea of zoning, and again, to keep this at kind of a high level, to not get too specific on this, but do we want to explore a change in zoning where these businesses are allowed, buffers, etc.?
I'm going back to where we were just talking about the DAs and the conditional use permit idea, and going to possibly just the one vehicle. I think that would be nice, because looking back on some other businesses that have been approved in the city, safety requirements for the public have been required. I'm thinking back to Dutch Brothers or Dutch Bros on Monte Vista and Kroll. In the meeting, during public hearing, the developer actually just agreed with members of the public and the city to add in, I think it was a couple of audible flashing crossing mechanisms or something to the intersection in order just to, not just appease, but to make sure everyone was at peace with the decision because of a traffic flow issue. I think if we can get to where we have something that's more flexible to where, because not every property is equal. And I do, on a personal note, I think I don't like the 600-foot limit. I would like a little bit longer, or put a barrier across the street, or a median or something like that, just to make it to where it's a little more user-friendly. Because some of the, I don't know if we were able to adequately address traffic and things in some of the other let's talk about the heavy operator. And it's nothing against them. They shouldn't be penalized for it. But going forward, I think there's a lot of things we could benefit from as a community.
So I'm wondering if maybe we could refresh our collective memory about how things went with the original ordinance and the zoning, because we had to come back and make adjustments at one point because what was laid out, there weren't enough available properties, or I don't remember how all that went down, but I remember we had to change the zoning at one point because what was initially created, there wasn't enough opportunity for businesses to exist.
We're just wait 1 second. We're going to get Director Quintero's mic on so she can give us some historical background. Please, Director. We're really firing on all cylinders this evening. Thank you. No, not
Katie Quintero, Director of Development Services. The zoning was established. The pilot program ordinance was actually adopted before the zoning was put in place, and was adopted completely. And so the zoning was adopted, and then we did come back within the zoning, within the Westside Industrial Specific Plan. There was a sub area that was adopted. So if there are properties that have heavy commercial or industrial zoning, and they're also in the Westside Industrial Specific Plan area, unless they're in the sub area that was adopted, any cannabis uses are not permitted. And so we did bring back an amendment that expanded the sub area to add some additional properties. So that was
was not a retail concern, that was more of the other uses.
Any cannabis uses were prohibited in the Westside Industrial Specific Plan, and so it did also, by amending that sub area, allowed for, if it had a commercial zoning and was in the Westside Industrial Specific Plan, opened an allowance for retail also.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments on? I am sympathetic to the idea of increasing the distance from schools and sensitive uses. I would like to at least hear more about how that would work with the landscape that we have now. And I'm gonna try not to get us in too much in the weeds, but I do think it was potentially a misstep in our zoning to allow for retail in some of the downtown uses, because I just don't know if that's necessarily the right location for the community's wishes for the downtown area.
I think this is a difficult decision to make without actually getting out the maps and looking at what we're taking off the table as far as options.
Certainly, we will create this as a area of further study. Anybody wishing to briefly talk about zoning?
Has to be brief.
3 minutes. You're starting now.
I'm just, the state set minimum standards, and those are just minimum standards. You have a planning commission and a city council. It's a case-by-case basis. You know, when somebody comes in, and some neighborhoods are okay with it, some neighborhoods may not be. And again, if you over-regulate something, you take the power away from the decision makers that are elected officials. So you've got, I don't think any changes need to be made to the zoning ordinance. First of all, you've got the 4 that are there pretty much. The locations are established for retail. Cultivation can only go in the industrial areas, I believe. So I don't think that's going to change, and cultivation would prefer to be there. But retailers have to have retail locations just like any other business. They're really not any different than wanting to have a good retail location. But you have minimum standards that the state set. Every dispensary has met those standards. And if there's unique conditions, then the CUP is discretionary. It doesn't have to be issued, right? I mean, you can say, I'm not going to do it, and leave it to, don't tie the hands of future commissions and future city councils. Thanks.
So again, this is my big bone of contention. I think this is a very poor plan. If you look at, I was trying to Google, the 2 dispensaries in Ceres are all in industrial areas, far away from a church, a park, and especially a school. I think I went and drove around and just looked up, or then I talked to a real estate agent. There were like 6 or 8 different places between Walnut and Kilroy in that area, south of West Main. So I'm trying to give you a visual. I had to look up. I couldn't remember Kilroy. But there were, and that's where Jesse Heinrich's, I think, place was down on South Kilroy. So that, to me, is you just basically handcuffed a lot of people and told them that they had to either go downtown. I actually had a downtown business owner call me, a very old family name, and ask me what I thought about it. And I said, as long as it's 1,000 feet from a church, a park, or a school, I don't care. And it ended up not going down there. But I think that this person knew that if it was going to go downtown on South Center or the south of West Main and downtown, that area, that there would have been a big brouhaha. Or I don't know. But I thought it was interesting that they called me. So again, I think by not putting it in the WISP, if you look at other communities, I would be really curious. I'll do another plug. We sell Girl Scout cookies at a lot of different places. We have sold lots in Denair, and that's probably a sidetrack. But it's just going back to zoning. Theirs is over, I think, 1,000 feet from a school as well, because we talked about that before. But to me, that was a huge misstep by the former council. Thank you.
Moving on, just the idea of prioritization. We obviously have seen that there's a lot to potentially consider here, and I will just make a plug for, while I want us to act comprehensively, I think in the interest of, not taking on too much that drags on for too long, incremental, perhaps, fixing the regulatory things we know first, exploring the revenue vehicle second, considering potentially zoning as the third incremental item, seems to make the most sense to me.
Agreed.
Can I almost take a step backwards with regard to zoning and that kind of thing? Is there any reason, I mean, we have what we have now, going forward, stating if you're going to come in a new store, it's got to be 1,000 feet from the school, or it's got to be
Direct that to Mr. Petrolakis. Is there?
Can you make future businesses play by the rules?
There are a number of answers to that question. So I think that, generally, are the distances in the CUP?
The spacing standard is in the ordinance.
In the ordinance, okay. So I think if Mr. Ward is able to keep his development agreements and the development agreements expire, then we could, do it that way if if you want to change it. But the practical thing is going to be you have businesses that I gather don't meet a certain distance that are already operating. And so I think that, that's going to be a difficult one to do much about. I think that if you did go down the route of saying, hey, we want, this is really important to us, we want it addressed, and we want you to go negotiate a DA, I think you would have to provide an alternative to, moving the business, right? I mean, I don't think it's,
I'm not talking about moving current business. I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no. I thought you asked me, could you retroactively apply it or just?
No. Going forward.
I'm sorry, Mr.
New applicants. I mean.
Yeah, that's easy to do. Yeah.
Okay, that
well,
was
I
my
should answer
question.
the easy question. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I don't think. I mean, obviously things were done.
Gave up my whole my whole deal.
All right.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
Well, that was my concern too, though, with it is just if we're going to change anything in those kind of zoning issues, the operator that's already there, they entered into an agreement. I don't think that if we keep the DAs going and they renew, there should be a grandfather mechanism in there just to keep it fair.
Where's my microphone? I'm going to open up to public if anybody wants to talk about any other policies that you have not heard us talk about or areas of investigation for us to consider moving forward at this time, and then we'll finally wrap up with closing comments.
Is there an ordinance for bars to be so far away from youth facilities or anything like that? Is there any ordinance for bars? Does anybody know? Is it 600 feet? Is it 1,000 feet? Or is it nothing? I mean, you got karate right across from Staley's. So I just was wondering why our zoning is just so critical these days of where it's going to be by a school, by a church. And I mean, there's bars by the church. So I just wanted to know if there was anything that was done for the bars on location.
Our local ordinance doesn't have a spacing standard, but I believe, and I would defer to Russ Holman from the police department who is here, I believe that ABC itself has spacing standards for sensitive uses, for alcohol uses.
We do, and when we get an applicant, it will come before us. One of the questions asked specifically about any churches or schools or daycares or parks within a certain area. I don't recall what that number is offhand, but it is something that we do take into consideration in making a determination as to whether or not we want to basically contest the issuance of a license by ABC. Ultimately, ABC has the authority to issue a license, but they will take our feelings into consideration.
Any final comments from the committee members?
I just want to thank everybody from the public for coming and being comfortable speaking. I know getting up in front of a group is not always a comfortable thing to do. Helps us to make better decisions when we hear what people are thinking. So I appreciate that.
I would just like to thank you for taking this project on. It's a big deal.
Well, and I'll echo Mr. Reep's comments. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming here this evening. It was really helpful and valuable to hear from our operators, and the points are well taken about the need to really understand what's happening locally as we are making these decisions. And it's really my intention for this process to be transparent and well thought out, and we're making sure that we're making good decisions for the long term. So I thank you, all the staff members who are staying later for a special meeting, and for all the public who has come as well. And we do not yet have a next meeting set because the topics were, coming forth from this meeting, but we will have subsequent notifications for what to do, where we'll go next with this. So with that, I will adjourn. Thank you very much, everyone.